A nation once praised for endless oil suddenly watches its veins dry, while skyborne buzzing insects tear through the heart of its capital, turning the Kremlin's stone facade into a trembling glass cage. How can a superpower choke on its own fuel and watch flame-kissed drones invade the homes of its elite? The answer unfolds in a tale of silent streets and roaring explosions. Earlier this year, endless queues formed before sunrise along the Black Sea, in frozen Crimean outposts and remote Far East towns. Drivers clutched paper coupons reminiscent of a bygone era, hoping for a single 10-liter canister before night fell. Refineries, pump stations and loading terminals, once the lifeline of a continent, were crippled, sealing both domestic supply and export routes. The impact rippled across 11 time zones, from the icy ports of Vladivostok to the historic warehouses of St. Petersburg, touching roughly 30 million people indirectly and 10 million directly. Hours disappeared in endless lines, while engines fell silent and a modern nation's pulse began to stutter. Then, on a September night, sirens screamed and explosions shattered the quiet. Dozens of Ukrainian kamikaze drones swarmed the Moscow sky, striking wealthy districts, fortified suburbs and the gleaming towers of the financial district. Authorities claimed 26 were shot down, yet fire still licked the walls of Krasnogorsk, and shattered glass rained down on Rubliavka. Airports shut, flights were diverted, and ordinary citizens felt the war's heat at their doorstep. The same crisis that starved stations now feeds a new horror, one that turns the capital's famed invulnerability into a trembling, exposed target. As the fuel lines dry and the drones buzz louder, the question remains, how long can an empire endure when its blood stops flowing and its shield finally cracks? Previously we saw how a cascade of strikes choked both domestic fuel flow and export routes, hammering linked hubs in central oblasts, industrial cities, ports and pipelines, turning a simple shortage into a full-scale logistics nightmare. A frozen moment has seized an empire that spans 11 time zones, from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg, from the Siberian taiga to the rugged Caucasus. The shock reverberates far beyond pumps. Roughly 30 million citizens feel the strain indirectly, while 10 million wrestle with the crisis daily. At 5 a.m. each morning, crowds shuffle to endless queues, the stale smell of gasoline mingling with cold air. Hands clutch paper tickets, hope flickering like a weak torch. Lucky few may scrape 10 liters before dusk. No sirens wail, no shells explode, just silent, dead engines. When engines stall, a modern nation's heartbeat flatlines. But silence shattered on the night of September 22. Sirens screamed, explosions ripped the sky, flames licked the Kremlin's stone walls. Tens of millions of Muscovites stared out to a sky filled with buzzing UAVs, a swarm as relentless as angry bees. This was not a stray incursion, it was a coordinated strike on at least 9 districts simultaneously. The defense boasted that 26 drones fell over the capital, yet the blasts echoed far beyond the outskirts. They rattled elite enclaves, Barvika, Rubliavka, where fortified walls meet private guards, and shattered glass towers of Moscow City, the financial heart of the nation. A fire erupted in Krasnogorsk, while structures and cars burned in Strozhanino and Nemchanovka. What does it mean when the most guarded citadel can be pierced by a buzzing insect? Can a system built on oil and steel survive when its own arteries run dry and its sky is breached? The answer lingers in the smoke. Summary of the previous scene: the night sky over Moscow lit up as silent drones slipped past the fortified walls of Barvika and Rubliavka, even reaching the glass towers of Moscow City. A fire erupted in Krasnogorsk, while flames lapped the streets of Strozhanino and Nemchanovka. The elite's safe bubble cracked, and a shiver ran through the capital's heart. What will happen when the most guarded districts turn into battlefields? The answer hovered just beyond the smoke. New development: Kiev sent a stark warning: strike our cities, and we will strike your richest, most shielded strongholds. The message hit Moscow like a thunderclap. Panic spread like wildfire, shutting down the entire city's infrastructure. Drones buzzed over Ryazan, Saratov, Engels and Kazan, forcing the emergency air cover carpet to roar into action. 3 massive airports, Nukovo, Sheremetyevo and Domodedovo, slammed their gates shut. Hundreds of flights vanished from the schedule, dozens diverted, leaving tens of thousands stranded in humming terminals. The Civil Aviation Authority imposed temporary limits at Kazan, Galendzik and Nizhny Novgorod. A passenger on a Dubai-Moscow flight spent the night crammed onto a cold terminal floor at Nizhny Novgorod, while Flight Su-531, slated to land in Moscow at 21:56, performed an emergency touchdown there instead. Travelers waited 3 long hours in cramped cabins before being ferried to the airport. Billions of dollars worth of Panzer S-1 and S-400 systems boasted a perfect shield, claiming to have downed dozens of unmanned aerial vehicles. Yet a single drone slipped past, striking critical points and shattering the illusion of invincibility. Moscow's famed safe harbor bubble burst that morning amid a chorus of shattered glass and rain-soaked metal. The war moved inside the mansions of the wealthiest Russians. While the capital's sky burned, fuel pumps across the nation sputtered and dried up. Fuel is the blood of a modern society. When it slows, every organ falters, just as Moscow's air defense system finally gave way. The endless queues at pumps are no longer a driver's inconvenience, they are the pulse of a nation held hostage. Every idle engine echoes a deeper failure, a rhythm stalled across a continent. Can a defense worth billions survive the sting of one relentless insect? The next sunrise would expose a country gasping for breath. A silent fire now licks the heart of a nation, scorching fields, empty pumps and terrified families. How could a country once proud of endless oil wells watch its own streets turn into queues of desperate drivers, while drones buzz like angry hornets over its capital? The answer lies in a crisis that spreads like poison, choking both the economy and the spirit of a people. Summary of the previous scene: the narrative compared the nation's failing fuel flow to a dying bloodstream, showing how long lines at pumps halt everyday life, from couriers to concrete mixers, and how the once invincible air defense shield over the capital finally cracked. Now the wave moving toward Russia's central oblasts is no longer an isolated glitch in Moscow. The fuel shortage has become a raging blaze that engulfs half the country. By mid-September, reports of empty pumps, strict quotas and endless lines arrived from regions along the central spine: Ryazan, Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov, Samara, Ulyanovsk, Penza, Rostov and Astrakhan. Independent observers confirmed the crisis touches more than 20 regions, spreading like a fever through the nation's core. Moscow feels the pressure mount as the cost of keeping the capital at the front of the supply line rises, while other areas are forced into tighter restrictions. Agriculture was the first casualty. In the fertile south, farmers could not find diesel for their combine harvesters during the peak of the wheat season. A single farmer unable to reap his grain does not merely lose his livelihood, he plants the seed of future bread shortages in the capital's bakeries. Refrigerated trucks, dependent on a cold chain, stall in warehouses and on dusty roads. The result: tons of fruit and vegetables rot, and the price of those goods doubles on supermarket shelves. The healthcare system bears the darkest scar of the crisis. Officially, ambulances have fuel priority, yet when a lone station runs dry in a small town, the station chief, not a doctor, decides which emergency vehicle can leave. Nurses delivering medication to remote villages and home care workers face the same dead end. Delays turn into lost lives. Logistics, the country's lifeblood, has ground to a halt. Couriers waste half their day in fuel queues, slashing deliveries. Construction sites watch concrete mixers idle, stalling multi-million-dollar projects. Trucks that should ferry goods from ports sit idle, breaking global supply chains. 2 lost hours in Russia become higher prices elsewhere, cancelled shifts, and a ripple of paralysis through every economic cell. The crisis has become more than an economic headline, it is a social and psychological blow. A generation raised on the myth of an energy superpower now watches empty pumps and feels national humiliation. If a nation rich in oil cannot feed its people, what else can it protect? Fear fuels panic buying, even drivers with half-full tanks rush to stations, deepening the shortage. A black market erupts. Barrel-filled basements sell fuel at 2 to 3 times the official price. Shoddy mixes damage engines, and unsafe storage threatens fire and explosions. The state struggles to curb the shortage while battling the illicit trade it unintentionally created. Insurance and freight costs soar as the supply chain loses its rhythm. All of this builds toward a startling question: with the country's veins clogged and its shield shattered, how long can the war machine keep moving? The answer may arrive from the sky. Earlier we saw ambulances and nurses stranded at empty pumps, their life-saving mission stalled by a fuel blackout. What happens when a country built on endless oil runs out of gasoline for its own streets? Imagine a nation watching its engines fall silent, farms left to rot, and a sprawling economy grinding to a halt. The crisis is not merely a shortage, it is a weapon turned inward, slicing the lifelines of daily life, from school buses to delivery trucks, threatening to collapse the very foundations of modern Russia. Couriers now spend half the day idling in endless fuel queues. Their deliveries drop by 50%, and business costs soar. Customers wait longer for packages, their patience wearing thin. A concrete mixer fails to reach a construction site on time, a multi-million-dollar project grinds to a standstill. Trucks meant to unload cargo from a docked ship linger in warehouses, breaking a global supply chain. 2 lost hours in a remote depot become a higher price tag in a distant market, a cancelled shift somewhere else, a ripple that spreads to every cell of the economy. The image of an empty fuel pump shatters the myth of an energy superpower, turning pride into national humiliation. People with half-full tanks rush to stations, fearing tomorrow's emptiness, creating panic buying that swells the already long lines. The black market erupts, barrels hidden in basements and garages are sold for 2 or 3 times the official price. Poorly stored or mixed fuel corrodes engines, and hidden containers pose fire and explosion hazards. The state juggles 2 battles, trying to manage the shortage while cracking down on the illegal trade it has unintentionally nurtured. Russia's supply chain loses its rhythm, insurance premiums rise, freight costs climb, and every transaction feels heavier. As the fuel crisis spreads across more than 20 regions, the question looms, will the next convoy ever leave the depot, or will silence become permanent? The crisis gripping Russia is no ordinary shortage, it's a profound unraveling, both economic and military, sprawling across an empire that once flaunted boundless energy wealth. Invisible costs, like soaring freight and insurance fees, now choke the veins of supply lines. Gas stations fill with restless queues, while exports collapse overnight. When diesel vanishes from the battlefield, armored vehicles stall. When cities lose their fuel lifeline, chaos seeps into governance itself. This isn't a mere incident, it's a deliberate campaign that cripples both the economy and the war machine. But how did a nation blessed with some of the richest oil reserves on Earth end up trapped in a fuel nightmare, or even tractors, ambulances, and cars starve for gas? The turning point came in mid-summer, when Ukraine unleashed a wave of covert, long-range drone strikes deep inside Russian territory. These weren't random raids, they were precision hits on vital nodes. Refineries in the Leningrad Oblast in the northwest went up in flames. Storage hubs in Volgograd in the south burned. Processing plants scattered along the Volga basin and a gas condensate complex near the Baltic coast were paralyzed. Even the chemical industries beyond the Urals in Bashkortostan came under fire. Some infernos raged for days, a fiery heartbeat of destruction that echoed through industrial districts. Others saw swift extinguishing but left critical units offline for weeks, forcing painstaking, uncertain restarts. Meanwhile, pipelines, the arteries of the energy lifeblood, were caught in a relentless cycle of shutdowns and patchwork repairs. Moscow's response was a scramble. Exports were curtailed abruptly. Sales on commodity exchanges were tightened. Inspections surged. Yet, no amount of paperwork could outpace the laws of physics. When a refinery's main production line goes dark, the railways feeding it slow, city distribution falters, and fleets grind to a halt. This created a domino effect. Small delays spiraled into sprawling disruptions across Russia's vast, intricate geography. The nation's sprawling energy juggernaut faltered, its supply chains broken into a fragile mess. Was this just a series of unfortunate incidents? Or was it a calculated siege, targeting the heart of Russia's energy backbone? The answer lies somewhere between shadow warfare and strategic economic sabotage, unfolding silently yet with brutal impact. The question now is grim: how long can this sprawling machinery keep running when every link in its chain grows weaker by the hour? In the unfolding saga of Russia's dual crises, one narrative is a creeping despair, while the other roars with explosive violence. As dusk fell on September 22, the air thrummed with tension in Moscow. The traditional image of an invincible Kremlin was shattered, rocked by Ukrainian drones assaulting the heart of the capital. Could anyone have predicted that these audacious strikes would signify a new phase in the war? How can a nation, rich in energy resources, succumb to such vulnerabilities? Fuel, the lifeblood of any nation, now trickles through empty veins. A devastating fuel crisis has gripped the country, leaving millions stranded in endless queues for mere drops of gasoline. Unlike any other calamity before, this crisis doesn't start with sirens or rockets but unfolds silently, like poison creeping through a body. Why are Russians, once proud of their energy dominance, reduced to desperately hunting for fuel, resorting to memories from a bygone era of coupons and rationing? The onset of this fuel disaster wasn't simply a matter of logistics, it was a calculated blow to the very infrastructure supporting both war and daily life. Attacks on key facilities sent shockwaves through distribution networks, crippling supply lines that stretch across vast and complex terrains. As the southern city of Volgograd became the focus, not only did the refinery face devastating strikes, but the repercussions echoed through interconnected transport routes. Is this random chaos, or is it a deliberate tactic to strike at the very roots of Russia's operational capabilities? In the wake of drone strikes targeting critical refineries like Karasher, flames danced upon the night as emergency crews scrambled. But quick responses can only mask the larger issue at play: prolonged shutdowns that could stifle the supply chain for weeks. The stakes are high. Interruptions in fuel supply directly threaten agricultural production and healthcare logistics. What happens when farmers can't harvest wheat or ambulances can't reach patients on time? This isn't simply an inconvenience, it foreshadows a future of despair and shortages. Adding fuel to the fire of panic, the sight of empty gas pumps ignites irrational behavior among the populace, creating a frenzied rush to secure what little fuel remains. Horror strikes as the realization sets in. The black market flourishes amidst scarcity, with those hoarding supplies fueling an underground economy at exorbitant prices. Isn't it surreal that in a nation sitting atop vast oil reserves, a crisis can push citizens toward such dangerous measures? The critical question looming over this chaos: how long can the Russian government maintain its grip when faced with such profound internal failures? The pillars of national pride now tremble under the weight of reality. Each day, a new chapter unfolds, revealing the fragility of a once mighty empire. As supplies dwindle, so too does hope, leading ordinary citizens to wonder if they will weather the storm or be swept away in a tide of insatiable need. What lies ahead in this silent war? Will the whispers of despair finally rise above the din of war, exposing the naked vulnerabilities of a nation? Only the coming days will unveil the ultimate fate of Russia as it navigates the treacherous waters of conflict and crisis. Earlier we saw repeated drone strikes pause operations, then flames lingered, exposing costly repairs. What if a single refinery, the pulse of a vast rail and river network, suddenly stutters? Imagine smoke curling over snow-capped fields, engines silencing, and entire cities watching fuel stations turn into barren deserts. The shock spreads faster than any headline, turning ordinary commuters into desperate hunters of empty pumps. Volgograd is more than a plant, it is the hub that threads the South's rail lines and inland waterways. When drones struck, the flow toward the Black Sea route stalled. Southern towns felt the choke, trucks idling, horns wailing in the cold morning air. The governor spoke of low-flying drones and successive explosions, yet the defensive shields simply rang with noise, unable to seal the leak. Further east, the Samara Basin houses Saizen and Novokvev, the heavy processing backbone of the nation. At Saizen, a primary line ignited, and a large share of capacity fell silent. Engineers announced repairs would stretch to month's end, the site humming only with distant alarms. Novokvev first throttled back, then shut down completely. Maintenance schedules tangled with restart attempts, prolonging the blackout. These twin facilities form a complementary pair in the Volga corridor. Should both falter, the surrounding oblast will wrestle with chaotic stock management, as trucks queue like restless beasts. The war's center of gravity has slipped far behind the front lines, striking at the heart of industry rather than the battlefield. When Salavat's output dwindles, the ripple reaches plastics, chemicals, solvents, and countless industrial inputs. Food packaging prices climb, construction crews stare at halted sites, and ordinary shoppers face surging costs. In the Baltic corridor, attacks on gas condensate lines and loading terminals shattered the myth of an invulnerable export backbone. Cargo reroutes to distant terminals, inflating freight and insurance premiums. Waiting ships groan in icy ports, each delay shaving profit from every barrel. A paradox emerges: foreign currency inflows shrink while domestic subsidies swell. Discounts deepen abroad, forcing the state to pour more budget into keeping domestic pump prices stable. The question remains: how long can a nation, proud of its oil wealth, endure a crisis that seeps into every kitchen, clinic, and construction crane? The answer hangs in the thin line of smoke drifting over the frozen horizon. In the previous part, we saw how rising premiums and extended delays at sea are cutting deeply into the country's oil revenues. Foreign currency inflows shrink while the domestic economy strains under growing subsidies to keep fuel affordable. The winter ahead only thickens the crisis, as heating fuel now competes fiercely with diesel needed for transportation and frontline supply. Against this backdrop, armored units grow more cautious, engines idle and wait, and the rhythm of war begins to falter. But what happens when cheap, unmanned drones keep striking key fuel infrastructure?
These low-cost aerial assaults inflict damage requiring expensive, time-consuming repairs.
When several critical supply points fall under simultaneous attack within the same region, the entire logistical landscape shifts, and not in favor of resilience. What emerges is a new normal, where supply slows down, risk premiums become permanent, and panic quietly takes root in the markets. Imagine a system designed to run like clockwork, grinding to a halt because fire crews can't put out blazes fast enough, and repair teams scramble against the clock. When maintenance schedules collide with these aggressive attacks, downtime stretches longer.
That delay sets off ripples across the market, fueling the hidden engine of fear. How does an army fight in such a suffocating grip?
The daily fuel demand for a modern army is colossal. Even in peace, it's massive, but in wartime, consumption doubles. Diesel powers tanks, armored vehicles, generators tucked behind the front lines, fuel tankers, heavy transports, maintenance vehicles.
Even the heating in frontline shelters depends on it.
When supplies waver, command centers shift gears immediately.
Training drills shrink.
Exercises get cancelled or postponed. Convoys run slower and fewer, often at riskier hours.
This is no simple rationing. It means a sharp drop in operational tempo. Movement becomes more predictable, yet hazardous, as fuel routes scatter in response to persistent strikes.
Logistical teams must remap every route, juggling more variables, more unknowns. In the southern and eastern theaters, trains haul most of the fuel to frontline troops. But attacks on rail lines and nearby facilities stretch delivery times. When fuel trucks try to compensate, the risks multiply. Roads are open, visible targets for drones and artillery. Slowly, the supply chain tightens. The daily fuel stock, that vital buffer meant to keep operations rolling, is shrinking fast. In some zones, it's rumored to have fallen to as low as 2 or 3 days. At such precarious levels, any sudden storm or surprise attack could snap supply lines altogether.
Picture commanders, eyes heavy with urgency, recalculating every movement.
The war isn't just in the trenches anymore, it's in every drop of diesel, every damaged pipeline, every disrupted shipment.
How long before the clock runs out?
As winter looms over the ongoing conflict, the fuel crisis intensifies, laying bare the fragility of an empire built on barrels of oil.
Heating supplies required for shelter now compete fiercely with diesel for transportation and logistics. This dramatic shift alters behaviors on the front lines. Armored units, once bold, now adopt a strategy of caution, avoiding unnecessary engine idling to conserve precious fuel. Operations adapt to a new reality. Flight hours for air assets diminish, and the deployment of piston drones becomes more strategic, targeting only the most crucial objectives. The slowing tempo isn't obvious at first glance, however, over the weeks, this deceleration paves the way for enemy counterattacks. Fuel, often overlooked, transforms into the Achilles heel of military operations, revealing a dual crisis, a logistical debacle and a psychological struggle that weighs heavily on morale. Reports of delayed convoys and wasted resources circulate, eroding the confidence of troops and commanders alike. As the supply chain stutters, the figures tell a sobering story. There's a staggering loss of 15 to 20% in processing capacity across the board. This translates into a daily shortfall of 600,000 to 800,000 barrels, equating to a staggering 18 to 24 million barrels each month. Such a decline, with barrels valued between $70 and $80, indicates potential revenue losses ranging from $1.2 billion to $1.9 billion monthly. When freight costs, taxes, and discounts are factored in, the situation becomes even more dire. The narrative of a crisis creeping toward the heartland is no longer mere speculation, it's a reality felt in every aspect of daily life. Every struck refinery doesn't just signal a temporary fix, it necessitates total recalibration of operations, rewriting logistical blueprints. How long can this system endure before the consequences become catastrophic? As the night draws in, the specter of failure looms and deepens the shadows cast over the nation. Will the machinery of war adapt in time, or will it falter in the face of dwindling supplies? This winter might reveal whether the empire can withstand the chilling winds of a fuel crisis that threatens to strangle its very heartbeat. The impending darkness may force a reckoning with the reality of a nation teetering on the brink of collapse. As the fuel crisis deepens in Russia, it is no longer just a headline. Every refinery that goes offline doesn't just disrupt operations for a week, it reshapes entire communities. Imagine a long line of cars at the gas station, starting at dawn,
waiting for fuel that rarely comes. Each hour spent waiting signifies a slow erosion of the nation's spirit and hope. The reality is this: Russia's energy dominance, once a point of pride, now feels alarmingly fragile. With each passing day, the anxiety grows.
How much longer can an energy powerhouse languish under the weight of its own inadequacies?
The specter of paralysis looms, a silence that will surround the battlefield before the guns ever fire.
This state of waiting has a name: queuing.
It embodies the frustration of citizens who whisper, "Tomorrow never comes."
And now, with drone attacks on the heart of Moscow and unprecedented breach of security, how much resolve remains? The home front bristles with tension and indignation. Amid crashing expectations and shattered illusions, will there be enough patience left in the populace for the leader to navigate this mounting chaos?
Consider this, and prepare for an unfolding story marked by a shift from pride to profound vulnerability.